Hi, I'm Kyle,
And I'm Josh.
and we're
Fear the Queer,
a podcast that talks about everything on our gay agendas, from politics and media.
to race and relationships. So sit back, relax, as we spill the tea.
Fear the
Queer.
That was beautiful.
That was good.
I know.
Thanks. Good evening, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Fear the Queer. On tonight's episode in particular, though, it's a little bit different. We're going to be starting off our Pride series. So, for the month of June, we're going to be releasing an episode each week leading up to Pride itself.
So today's episode, we will be discussing the Stonewall riots, which basically kicked everything off for why we have Pride to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But before we begin, as always, Josh, what are we drinking tonight?
Well, to celebrate Pride Month, we are be drinking Liberation Libations.
Cheers, queers!
Cheers, queers!
And Josh, if I wanted to make this drink, what's in it?
Well, in the words of Marsha P. Johnson, pay it no mind.
Or you can go to our thirst trap section on our Instagram for all of our drink recipes.
Yeah, that too. Anyway, cheers, queers.
Cheers.
Bottoms up again. But before we begin, we're going to be doing another segment of Tea
for two, in which we give the other two topics that they can discuss. Now, if they don't like either of the topics, they can say no, but then we'll have to pull out a third topic, which they will have to spill the tea on.
Mm-hmm.
So, Josh, would you like to begin tonight? I'm ready for you to give me two topics to spill the tea on.
Sure. So the first topic that I give you is Mr. Ratburn and his gay marriage on Arthur, and how that has given apparently so much controversy in the fucking state of Alabama.
Well, there's a lot happening there, too.
So was it Arkansas? Either one. It's one of those nasty states.
Either one
Yeah.
starts with an A.
Yeah.
What's your second?
This one's actually a little bit more on the tragic side. The murder of Malaysia Booker.
Ooh, okay. I'm going to I'll touch on both of them, but
Yeah.
I'll go a little bit more in depth on Malaysia Booker because I think it's more important.
Right.
I'll say the whole Arthur thing.
Mhm.
Of course, there's some Southern conservative nonsense, like being like, oh, there's a gay rat on TV. First of all, it's a rat.
It's a rat.
It's
right.
a rat.
Second of all, Arthur is still on TV somehow.
Which I'm living for. I'm so happy about
Right.
that. It'll all work out in the end. I remember years ago, and I think other news outlets have talked about this, that sideshow, like, about Buster.
Mm-hmm.
There was an episode where there were two moms, and PBS cut it from the air.
Of course.
And it was, like, in 2005. I remember that controversy, and I was like, there's people with two moms out there? So, of course, like, Arthur making waves again, being a gay icon.
Hey, kudos to Arthur.
But more on, like, a serious note. So, Malaysia Booker, for those of you who don't know, what was it? A couple weeks ago, there was a video of a trans woman being beaten and slurs were used against her, and it was all videotaped, and no one stopped it.
Right, and it was outside of her apartment building, and she was attacked by a group of people where they were just literally just beating her savagely into the ground, and no one was doing anything about it.
So after she was able to get out of the hospital, she did make a statement saying, "This time I can stand before you, whereas in other scenarios, we are at a memorial." Now, sadly, Malaysia Booker was shot recently, and she's the fourth trans woman of color to be killed this year.
Right, alone.
So it's heartbreaking. I just think that, like, people need to talk about this. This is not okay. This is... It kind of leaves me speechless. Like, I want to be all like, oh, let's talk about it. Outside of just, like, the gun control conversation, because obviously that led to this death. But at the same time,
I think it's
more the transphobia.
Right. And the history of the violence against trans people.
Right. And, I don't think unless everyone just within the community and outside the community and allies, like, start speaking up, things aren't going to change and they're just going to get worse. So...
Well, and the frustrating thing about it, too, is that people, to this day and age, still are only hung up about the fact about the physical aspects of a transgender person.
Yeah.
Like, they only talk about, well, what about the genitals, and what about this? How are we going to configure about this and that? When, in reality, you should be focusing on the fact that these people are murdered every single day, and their rights are being taken away from them left and right, and they're left with literally nothing.
What kills me is a lot of society looks at trans people as, like, not people. So if they've dehumanized them already, when they die, they're like, okay. Because they've already dehumanized them. It's tragic, it's awful, it shouldn't be happening.
Right.
That's what I have to say about that.
Okay.
Okay, so my T for two for you.
Yes.
So here are the two topics.
Okay.
So one is kind of on a serious note. It's about all of these anti-choice legislation happening in southern states like Alabama and Georgia, and kind of the attack that it has.
Well, even in the Midwest, the Missouri.
Right, right. And so I just wanted to hear, like, your thoughts on that, because, like, while this is coming for cisgender women, it also affects, like, queer people and gender nonconforming people and trans men. So it's like these reproductive rights are a queer issue. So that's my one, topic that I want you to discuss.
Right.
Or something a little bit lighter. So, we talk about media a lot on this, and when this podcast will be airing, Rocket Man will be out. We have yet to see it.
The Elton John biopic.
The Elton John biopic, right. And there was a lot of speculation that they were going to cut out a lot of the gay love scenes and really tone it down, kind of what happened with the Queen biopic of Bohemian Rhapsody. Well, according to people who have seen it at Cannes, that is not the case. It's very gay. So I kind of want you to, discuss your thoughts on media sanitizing how we discuss queer love stories.
Okay.
So that a mainstream audience can kind of undertake it.
Right. Well, I'm going to take on both, actually.
Yeah, go for it. I think that we're very...
Yeah.
We're
on edge.
we're on edge. It's Pride Month, and we're ready to drink as much tea as we can.
Right, exactly. So in terms of the legislation being passed about banning abortions after 6 weeks, and in some cases 8 weeks in some states, I think... Again, I can't believe that this seems like we're, like, being thrown back into, like, the 1950s.
Right.
The people who passed this legislation, of course, are all white men. And it's so frustrating to me because...
sorry to cut you off, but I think it's, like, complete... It's good to point out that in Alabama, the governor is a white woman.
Right.
Because white cis women do
awful
benefit.
Things too. Yeah.
They benefit from white supremacy.
Yeah, they do. I think it's just rather frustrating because, like you said, it obviously affects cisgender women, this abortion ban.
Right.
But then there's also the trans men, the people who non-conform to either gender.
Right.
Like, where do they... Obviously, they don't have the same protections as well. And on top of that, these people also have things against them that could say they actively can discriminate against them due to religious beliefs. So... they could possibly be refused at a hospital. I don't even know if that would happen, but they could be refused at a hospital for a service. Yeah, because it's just like, well, I'm not treating you for my religious beliefs. And then there's going to be so many... The thing is that these bans are not going to stop abortions. It's just... All it's going to do is just make everything unsafe. And there's going to be so many sick people out there. Because unfortunately, in this world, abortions are just going to have to happen. Whether it be just out of tragedy or just for the woman's health.
It's part of healthcare.
Exactly. And are these people who are going to be banning abortion, are they going to be taking care of these people? Are they going to be making sure that their rights are protected, like, when the child is born?
Right. No, because they don't actually care. To me, it's less of, like, a man versus woman kind of situation and more about, like, a class structure of discrimination. Because the wealthy white men will still be able to go out of state to get their mistresses, wives, daughters, whatever it might be, abortions. But those of lower income...
will not have that same...
will suffer.
Right.
It's all about keeping those in a lower income bracket
down. Right, exactly. So it's very frustrating. And this is coming from a cisgender man, so it's just like, I wish I could seek more on this, but I couldn't experience the anger and frustration that... Because I benefit from not having to deal with any of that.
Yes and no. I would even say that, like, I think it's okay to speak on these topics because... not speaking is almost like putting towards
it's more
violence.
Damaging.
It's more damaging. So you might as well speak out against this awful legislation that's happening.
That's true. In terms of the Rocket Man reference, I just think it's funny because Bohemian Rhapsody was it's funny because a lot of people are just, like, frustrated because it sanitized Freddie Mercury's queerness.
Right.
But, I mean, it's also just a fucking awful film in general.
I mean, I had fun.
Yeah.
I recognize that there was a lot of really poor editing choices, but
right.
the performance scenes were good.
Right. I think it's actually kind of great because I think the backlash from Bohemian Rhapsody, as successful as it was, I think it was loud enough for executives to be like, you know what, we're going to have to make it up to them. Here's an uncensored look at Elton John's life. Right, plus, exactly. Elton John's alive, so I feel like he would have a lot more creative control over it than,
he's
unfortunately.
Like, make it gayer.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Make it more gay.
And I don't know, it's just so weird to me because it's just like on TV, like we have a show like How to Get Away with Murder where, two gay characters are literally like ass naked in front of the camera in the shower.
And they have ass naked.
Ass naked, butt ass naked. And in the shower, and it still has supreme high ratings and stuff like that.
Sure.
And yet, film executives are just like, I don't know if they're ready for this.
Hollywood is always like 10 steps behind whatever is happening in gay culture and in TV. To be, pointing that out.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, I don't know. Can you keep up, Hollywood? That's all I have to say.
Beyonce's been saying it. Can you keep up, Hollywood? Okay, let's get to the heart of our gay agenda. As we said in the beginning, we are going to be discussing the Stonewall riots as part of our Pride series.
Pride series!
And might as well start it right there. Now, even before the Stonewall riots, there was something called the Compton Cafeteria riots, which happened in 1966.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, I never heard of that.
Yep, it was in San Francisco, and Stonewall happened in New York, Greenwich Village, as we'll be discussing, in 1969.
It's the 50th year anniversary of it, too.
It is the 50th year. So it's very important that we talk about this. Now, the Compton Cafeteria riots started because trans women, drag queens, and sex workers were all in the Compton Cafeteria. Like, they used to, go there after a long day's work and just, get their libations, get a coffee, and just chill. Well...
So, the cast of Rent, basically.
The cast of Rent, yes. We both take drinks.
We're just like, Rent.
Rent. So anyways, as these women and drag queens are all hanging out, the police, shocker, started to harass them and arrest them. And this has gone on for a long-ass time. So one day, a trans woman and others had enough. And that trans woman picked up her coffee and just threw it in the cop's face.
Ooh, girl.
I know.
Ooh, really? And we thought that tea was scalding on our end.
Was about to even be more scalding. So everyone in the cafeteria started beating the police.
Oh my God.
With their heels, with their purses. And it was one of the first times recorded that there was a queer uprising. Now, we don't have the specific dates outside of San Francisco, 1966. Because the police they wouldn't release the records. And at the time, like a lot of news outlets today, they don't report accurately on queer issues happening unless it's sensationalized.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, that makes sense too, because in the 60s, this was at the heart of I feel like a very angry era. And I don't want to just reduce it to just saying that it was an angry era, but I mean, think about it. We were in the middle of the Vietnam War. JFK was shot in 1963, so we're still kind of recovering off of that. Martin Luther King, the civil rights activist, was killed in 1968, I think?
Yep, a year before.
Right, Stonewall. So, we are living in very hostile, angry times. And
it was definitely at a boiling point.
Right, and it seemed like it was at a point where it was just government versus the people. And the people were getting very fed up with it, which makes sense of, why... Yeah, what was it called? The Compton Cafeteria?
Compton Cafeteria riots.
And the Stonewall riots happened as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot was happening in New York during this time because of post World War II.
Right, exactly.
And the beat poet movement and just kind of there was a larger LGBTQ group.
Well, especially in Greenwich Village.
Yes, Greenwich Village. Yeah.
Which I can never say correctly, but it's what is it called?
counterculture?
Yeah, I guess.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, in a way. I guess modern day term, it would just be, hipsterville, basically.
It'd be like hipsterville without the money.
Right.
Like a lot of like musicians, poets, gay, straight, black, white, brown, men, women, anyone in between, hung out in Greenwich Village because it was like a safe area for them to be.
Right. So, also you have to think about in this time, homosexuality, though there was no law banning homosexuality, there was still a lot of hostility towards it. And police would actually try to find ways to get around that so that way they can arrest people for being gay without having to say it.
Exactly.
Right. So during this time, policemen would be doing some fucking shady things where, I mean, if you had two gay men kissing on the street, they would be arrested for lewd acts in public, which is like, it's a kiss on the lips,
Right.
Which is weird because it's like something that I take for granted to this day. Like,
that anyone wants to kiss you, or
shut up. that I am so pretty. And then there's also the act of when the policemen would dress up in plainclothes and they would try to solicit gay men or women, and they would go to things like the YMCA, public parks, things like that, and they would try to flirt with men or women that they knew would be homosexual. Anytime that it'd be reciprocated, they immediately would be fucking arrested.
Right.
Which is, like, what the fuck?
Oh, it's total bullshit.
Right.
So...
Like, could you imagine, in this day and age, some guy just coming up to you...
No, I can't.
Like, that's fair. Like, coming up to you, flirting with you, and then 2 seconds later you're in the back of a cop car being arrested for, like, lewd public service. And at that time, there were so many people who were closeted, too, and that's how they were outed. That's insane. I'm sorry. So
when you have, like... we'll get back to Stonewall Inn. So it was bought by the Mafia in 1966, right?
Yep. And specifically by, it was a family. It was like Vito Giovannisci, I think. That was his family who bought it.
Vito Giovannisci.
Right. It's just like, could you have like a more Italian name?
Can I get that with breadsticks? I'm at Olive Garden. So the Mafia bought it. Right. I'll have the number 5. The Mafia bought it. And they were doing everything they could to make a profit off of these marginalized queer people. So Stonewall became kind of an area for people to hang out in, such as like Marsha P. Johnson. She was actually the first to go to, Stonewall in what they considered to be cross-dressing, even though she was a trans woman.
Right. Well, yeah, because like up until that point, I don't think girls or like women were allowed in gay bars.
Right. And even, like, women, if they were stopped by the police, they had to have 3 articles of clothing that were, like, female, and I use that, like, term loosely, female-identified, like, clothing items. Right. Otherwise, they would be written up or arrested.
Right, exactly.
So everyone's hanging out at Stonewall, and even though Stonewall was a bar, it didn't have a liquor license.
No, so everything was really watered down. They had to, like, try to find ways to get around it so that way they could serve their patrons. But I think the Mafia actually had something to do with that, too. I think they paid the cops off by being like, yeah, like, just turn your head the other way.
Yeah, they would pay the cops off because usually the bars were tipped off to when the police raids would be coming through. So if the Mafia paid off the cops would, stay at bay until they would come about.
Right.
Well, just one night, it just came to a head.
Yep. June 28th, 1969. It was around 1 o'clock in the morning, and the police, I think some of them were in plainclothes, but the other ones were actually in full uniform, just bust open the doors in the bar and called a raid. Now, like you said, normally the bartenders were tipped off for this, and they had no idea that this was going to happen.
Complete surprise.
Yeah, so everyone was in shock about this.
Including the mafioso, like, owners were kind of pissed off.
Oh, yeah. So policemen automatically were lining people up against the walls, and they were checking for identification. And anyone who was seen like a drag queen or a woman were then forced into the women's bathroom, and they had to expose themselves to prove that they were women.
Right.
Yeah.
Could you imagine?
I know. Like, imagine if you were at a bar and a cop tells you to pull down your pants to prove that you are...
The gender that's on your identification.
Right.
Or dressing as the gender that you are supposed to read as. It's complete bonkers to me.
Yeah.
So while this is all happening...
So actually, well, it was actually getting to the point where people were really fucking pissed off, and they were refusing to hand over their IDs. They were refusing to undress, and it was starting to get a hostile environment. Meanwhile, the people that they were shooing away are now crowding around outside the bar, looking in to see, hopefully, everything, their friends, their loved ones are okay.
Now, a lot of this, history of Stonewall is, I don't want to say fantasized. No. But we don't have, any sort of, written down...
Well, no, there's no, actual proven facts. This is all based off of retelling of people who've been there that night. And so that's the only thing we can go off of, really.
So that being said, people said that Marsha P. Johnson was so fed up, she took a shot glass and she threw it against the mirror and she said, "I know my civil rights." And a lot of people say that's when it started. So Marsha P. Johnson, like we said, was a transgender person.
Yeah, transgender woman, drag queen, queer activist.
And she started going to Stonewall to, just let loose. Well, she was fed up. Now, I believe there was something else that happened. Someone else was beaten, weren't they?
Yeah, so it's just, that's the thing, too, because there's so many accounts of, how this happened that we don't really know what started what. But there's a woman named Stormy Delavery. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I'm very sorry if I'm not. But as people are being arrested, taken into the cop cars, she was being dragged out of the bar, and she was complaining that her handcuffs were way too tight. Meanwhile, all these people and a crowd is gathering, 500, 600 people are gathering around seeing what's going on here. She's complaining. A cop then takes a baton and beats her over the head to get her to shut up. And, of course, the crowd is shocked, and she turns to them, and she's like, "Why aren't you guys doing anything? Why aren't you guys helping?" And apparently, on some accounts, that's when things just fucking blew up.
And protesters started throwing pennies and bricks and anything they could get their hands on. They started slashing tires of the cop cars.
Yep.
And the cops really didn't know what to do because at that point, there was a huge crowd that came to...
Oh, they outnumbered them 6-1.
Yeah. And, so this went on for 2 nights. The second night, they say that Marsha P. Johnson actually climbed a telephone pole and dropped her purse full of bricks onto a cop car to smash the windows. I love a queen that does that.
Yeah.
Get him, Marsha.
Right. Well, and the crazy thing, well, not the crazy thing, but I think the most, for me, heartwarming moment about this is that a lot of accounts say that the people who were fighting back the most were the drag queens, the people of color, and the homeless youth that were accepted into Stonewall. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to put into is that Stonewall Inn was not only a place for drag queens and people to hang out, but they also accepted the gay homeless youth
that hung out at the Christopher Pierce.
Right, exactly, because they weren't actually a bar, they were allowed in.
Right.
Yeah.
And the drinking age also at the time was 18. So we have to remember that there were teenagers that were in this bar that were actually allowed to drink.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there.
Yeah. Right. So we have, and then there's also Sylvia Rivera, who was there that night as well. She, I don't know exactly where she was at in all this. Do you?
Well, according to some accounts, she was the one throwing the brick. She was according to some, the one who threw the first brick.
Oh, okay.
Now, her and Marsha, they knew each other from outside of Stonewall.
Right.
They actually had been sex workers on the street together. And Marsha took Sylvia under her wing because Sylvia left her house, I think it was at 11 or 12, and started working the streets. So they had this bond, and the two of them kind of formed together and really persisted in this riot and fought back against the police. Now, those who were not able to go to the riots or did not witness the riots had to find out because the Greenwich Voice, the Village Voice, they started writing, okay, this is what happened, and flyers started to circulate, and kind of this a more aggressive.
Well, I think more people
activism started happening.
Well, I was gonna say I think more people turned up on night 2 of the riots than night 1 even.
Right. Yeah. So after the Stonewall riots, that is.
Oh, actually after. Oh, yeah.
So after the 2 nights of rioting at the Stonewall Inn, the whole nation started to hear about it. There was circulation, counterculture, newspapers and writings saying what happened that night, and the gay liberation was on the rise. And when I say gay liberation, I mean the LGBTQ plus liberation. But at the time, they just called it the gay liberation.
Right, yeah. And so for those of you who may not be very familiar with Stonewall, this is sort of the historic landmark of where people say this is where the modern day gay liberation started.
Right. So while, the cafeteria riots did happen, this is when it really got the ball rolling and people started to, listen up and take queer people seriously. So it was on June 29th, 1970, so a full year later.
Right.
There was a pride parade.
The first pride parade. And it was in the city of New York, San Francisco, and Chicago.
Woo, Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago! And so it was in honor of the Stonewall riots a year beforehand. And that's where the beginning of pride parades really began.
And the year after, there was even more cities and places all over the world started celebrating Pride.
Right.
And it all started because of Stonewall.
Well, and I think Chicago reports of how many people actually attend Pride. And I think even from the beginning of 2001 to 2010, I think it was around 20,000, 30,000. I can't remember. It was not too large, but last year, over 1 million people.
It was huge.
Have come to Pride. And it's just such a beautiful thing to go to the parade, too, simply because it's just a
gay old time.
Right, exactly. But it's weird to me because sometimes I even forget about Stonewall when I'm in the moment, and I need to remember that that's what we're celebrating.
Right. When was the first time you heard about Stonewall?
First time I heard about Stonewall was in history class in high school.
Really? You got it in high school?
Well, we were talking about notable, notable riots throughout history.
Liberation, because at the time there was civil rights and women's liberation and all that good stuff.
Yeah, we were talking about a lot of that, and Stonewall was briefly mentioned. We didn't really go into depth of it at all. I didn't really know in full force of the history of it and the people until 2016, which was 3 years ago.
Yeah,
which isn't that long.
I think there's a lot of people that still don't know. I didn't really know anything about Stonewall until I went to my first Pride parade, and they kept referencing
what year was
Stonewall.
1930.
If Stonewall happened in 1969, someone's drinking their liberation, or whatever we're calling this drink. He takes another swig of it. It was 2012.
Okay.
And, I think in the years after Stonewall, there's been a lot of discussion on how activism looks. Because a lot of people are like, well, you shouldn't be throwing bricks at the police. We just want to assimilate into society. Well, that wasn't working for a lot of people.
No.
There was some queer literary papers in the 1950s, but they were kind of aimed more at white men and women that were just trying to assimilate into heteronormative society.
Right. It was more in the sense of how can we squeeze in, rather than you need to take us seriously and this is what we stand for. And
I think today there's still people who will say oh, you shouldn't be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that when it comes to activism. When in reality, we need all kinds of activists and people speaking up in order to make the movement happen.
Oh, for sure. Now, do you think that Stonewall's legacy still holds up over time, considering the fact that some people don't even know what it's even about to this day?
I think it's getting better, because I think that if we continue to talk about it and bring it up, I take it for granted that most of my gay friends know what the Stonewall riots were.
Yeah.
But even people within my own family, it's
how many people died there?
Oh my god. That's a reference to Derek Barry.
Yeah.
Oh my god, from RuPaul's Drag Race.
I'm just kidding.
But I think we take it for granted a little bit because we try to find our history. It's if you were never told your history, wouldn't you want to try to figure out every little piece of it?
Oh yeah.
So that's kind of how I feel.
Well, and it's funny too because
long-winded because I tell people Stonewall and all these other little intricacies all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too because we live in a day and age where even though our rights are still we still have to fight for them, clearly, with the abortion ban and everything like that.
Right.
There's still so many things that you take for granted with the people who have come before us and who have fought to get to where we are now. You know what I mean? I forget sometimes that I am able to walk down the street and kiss someone on the lips and not be arrested for a lewd act of indecency.
Right, and I forget that I can wear, female clothing that would be traditionally female or makeup and not be pulled off to the side and arrested.
Right. Or, like, you'd have to, like, show off, like, your body just to prove that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is what's on my ID. So the legacy of Stonewall, I think, is really powerful. I mean, in, 2016, President Obama did make it a national landmark. So that's really cool. Like, it's not going anywhere. It reminds people of that, and he did it during Pride Month.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Well... And I think since, considering the fact that it's the 50th anniversary, which is so weird to think about, only 50 years have passed.
50 years ago.
Have passed since the riot. I think it's very important for us to release this information to people who may not have even known this.
Right. Some of our listeners might not know all the details surrounding Stonewall. I think, again, we talk about kind of the fantasy surrounding the story and the legacy. And I think people, maybe they know Marsha P. Johnson, maybe they know Sylvia Rivera, and they probably have heard about, like, them throwing bricks or the shot glasses and fighting back against police. But it's so much more layered when it comes to this being a place for people to organize and build a community.
Right.
And, I think it also goes into talking about violence against queer people, also brought on by the heteronormative society, but also police. I don't know. It's things to discuss, to think about. And, like we talked about earlier, trans women are still being murdered.
To this day.
And trans women are what got us Pride.
Yeah, they are the reason why we have the rights that we have today.
So when you're dancing up on that float in your go-go boots, and you're wearing your jock strap, just remember, a trans woman of color
is the reason why you got you there.
Yeah. So Pride's all good and fun, but always good to start at the very beginning and talk about Stonewall.
Exactly. And I mean, there are so many positive things that came about from the riots itself, too, in terms of gay activism and groups.
Right, because Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera started STAR.
Yes, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries? STAR. S-T-A-R, yeah, STAR.
Yes, yeah. STAR. And when we say transvestite, that is what they call themselves.
It's an antiquated term, yes.
So don't come at us, PC warriors.
Well, that's just what the title was. But then there was also the birth
But what did they do? STAR.
Well, so they basically were trying to help protect queer homeless youth in particular.
Yes.
And
they also had a building that they were able to take in queer homeless youth.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then I think in New York and San Francisco, I think there was also 2 major queer groups that formed that the year after Stonewall in. See, this is the thing. I take for granted for Stonewall so much. I don't even know some of the activism groups that have created after this.
Well, I know that, like, there's ACT UP, which Marsha P. Johnson was very a part of, and that was during the AIDS epidemic.
Right.
And, there's all this, like, gay liberation movement. And again, when I say gay, I mean, like, it's the full spectrum. It's just, that's what they call themselves.
Right, exactly. Have you ever been to New York to visit Stonewall?
I've been to New York, but not to Stonewall. Have you?
No, I've never been to New York. I was just curious if you have.
Oh, no, it's on my list of things to do. It's just, like, to go and look and see it. And it's just kind of like, oh, this is where it all started.
Sorry, I'm focusing on the groups that came afterwards. I think it was like the Gay Liberation Front. And it was the first gay organization to actually have the title gay in it.
Oh.
Yeah. And then there was also the Gay Activists Alliance. Have you heard? Do you heard about that one? I don't even know if these are actually...
I think a lot of it all just kind of flows together because also during this time there were so many activist groups starting up, but because everyone has like such a different experience from one another, there was a lot of like butting heads. So like the women's movement was one thing, and then you have like the lesbian movement and the gay men's movement and the trans women and Black Panthers and it gets very messy as opposed to just everyone coming together and fighting for the same rights. There was a lot of division.
At the time, yeah. Well,
at the time. Even now.
I was going to say, well, even now, yeah. Sometimes. Yeah. So even though we just talked briefly about the history of Stonewall, I feel like there's so much to go more into with Pride itself, where Pride stands today. How Stonewall has affected both the public view of the queer community versus, political activist movements. But considering the fact that we have all month to talk about it, we don't want to spoil it all in just one episode.
So tune in every Tuesday and we'll be releasing a new episode as part of our Pride series.
Yes. So just to announce it, we are going to be breaking up into 4 different parts. We won't reveal everything, but we will say next week is all about pop culture.
Pop culture, media.
Yes.
Stonewall to the present. So the major queer moments in pop culture and media that have happened.
Right, and how it has influenced the American public view of the queer community today.
So, Josh, I'm glad that we got to discuss Stonewall and the Stonewall riots. I think it's a good first episode.
It is.
As part of our Pride series.
Yes, little introduction and history of what you should know.
And if you've heard anything on here, then you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Or, oh, I know something else about the riots that they didn't cover.
Right. Or, girl, you got that all wrong.
Yeah, I hope not.
I know.
I looked up multiple sources and I was like, and I've also read a couple books on Stonewall, and it's all, the history is a little muddled, but it all kind of is the same.
But, I mean, could you imagine, all that going on in those 40...
Well, there weren't any phones to film.
Right.
What are people going to do? Break out their notebooks and be like, okay, I'm not going to write poetry or music tonight. I'm going to write about the Stonewall riots.
Right. I think that's Marsha P. Johnson over there.
Marsha P. Johnson. Oh, hey, girl. Oh, she's mad. So
anyway, so just to wrap up, if you like to hear, if you'd like to correct us on anything, if you'd like to contribute, feel free to contact us. You can reach us at fearthequeerpodcast@gmail.com, or you can leave comments on our Instagram, Facebook, or even any of our SoundCloud or Spotify accounts.
Right, yeah, because you can follow us on SoundCloud and Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
And our little cousin Castbox that I still really don't know much about, but we still support you, boo.
Well, let's just cheers to the gay liberation.
Yes, with our liberation libations.
Mm-hmm. And as always, I'm Kyle.
And I'm Josh.
And we're Fear the Queer.
Bye.